In the dusty frontier town of Redemption Springs, everyone had forgotten about Martha Hendris. She was just the quiet widow who ran the boarding house, a woman whose kindness was mistaken for weakness. Folks saw her simple clothes and her tired eyes and dismissed her, casting her aside like a worn-out tool. They saw what was on the surface, but they never bothered to look deeper. But one man saw her differently. A rugged mountain man, a hermit named Ezra Cole, would ride into town once a month for supplies. He spoke little and seemed as weathered as the peaks he called home. But from beneath the brim of his hat, he watched. He saw the fire no one else did. He saw a soul worth protecting. And he knew something the town didn't. Danger was coming. A notice was about to be nailed to her door, a debt designed to steal everything she had. And behind that notice was a threat even worse, a gang of ruthless men who wanted to take not just her home, but her dignity. That's when the quiet mountain man made a choice that would stun everyone. He would risk his land, his supplies, his very life to keep her safe. What would make a man give up everything for a woman the world had cast aside? You're about to find out. Redemption Springs was a dying town in the summer of 1882. The silver mine had dried up years ago, leaving behind only empty pockets and hollow hope. Martha Hendris had lived in that boarding house with peeling paint for 12 years, ever since the mine took her husband Thomas. The townfolk called her soft, never understanding that her generosity was a kind of strength they could never possess. She wore her late husband's wedding ring on a tarnished chain around her neck, a reminder that she had once been truly seen. What she didn't know was that someone was seeing her again. Ezra Cole lived alone in the mountains, a man haunted by a past he'd tried to outrun. He came to town only when he had to, a ghost moving through the streets. But he'd noticed Martha. He'd seen her 2 years back, stepping between a terrified Chinese railroad worker and a mob of cruel ranch hands. "He's under my roof," she'd said, her voice shaking but firm, "which makes him under my protection." Ezra had watched, stunned. Here was a woman the town had dismissed, defending someone even more powerless than herself. From that day on, he paid attention. He saw the dismissive glances, the cruel whispers, and he saw the quiet dignity with which she faced it all. It stirred something in him he thought had died long ago. On a late August morning, he watched her through the kitchen window, kneading bread as the sunlight caught the wedding ring on her neck. Just then, she looked up, and their eyes met. Ezra touched the brim of his hat. Martha smiled, a small, surprised smile, and nodded back. It was nothing, a brief exchange. But Ezra carried that smile with him all the way back up the mountain, a flicker of warmth in his solitary world. That evening, sitting on his porch, he made a quiet promise. If Martha Hendris ever needed help, he would be there. He had no idea that promise was about to be tested. The notice appeared on her door the next Tuesday, a legal document nailed there by the banker's assistant. A small crowd gathered, their faces a mixture of curiosity and cruel satisfaction. The words were cold. Martha owed $340 in back taxes. She had 30 days to pay, or the property would be seized. $340. It might as well have been the moon. Martha stood on her porch, her hands trembling. "I suppose this was inevitable," Mrs. Keene from the Mercantile said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Can't run a business on charity." Martha carefully unpinned the notice. She went inside, closing the door softly, and made it to her bedroom before her legs gave out. She sat on the edge of her bed, the paper clutched in her hand. She had $4.60 in a coffee tin. The boarding house was all she had. Without it, she would be a beggar. She touched the ring on her neck. She couldn't let her crisis stop her from caring for her boarders. She stood, smoothed her skirts, and went to the kitchen. Word spread through town like a disease. By evening, everyone knew. The saloon buzzed with talk of who might buy the property. No one talked about helping. The next morning, Martha swallowed her pride and went door to door. The answer was always no. She went to the bank. Mr. Garrison, the president, listened with professional sympathy, which was no sympathy at all. "Business is business," he said. She left feeling smaller than she ever had. But what she didn't know was that someone had seen it all. Ezra Cole was in town that morning. He saw the notice. He saw her face go pale. He went to the saloon and listened to the vultures gloat. 340, one man laughed. "She'll never raise that." Ezra's hand tightened on his glass. That night, back in his cabin, he took inventory of everything he owned: his horse, his traps, his rifle, and his savings. For 15 years, he'd put aside gold and coins. He poured it all onto his table: gold dust, coins, a few small nuggets. He counted it carefully. 362. 40. Enough. Just enough. This was 15 years of hard, lonely work. His security, everything he had. He could pay her debt and have less than $25 to his name. It was foolish. He barely knew her. She would never even know. But he remembered his promise. Ezra Cole had been many things in his life: a soldier, a killer, a coward. But he had never broken a promise to himself. He counted out exactly $340. Tomorrow he would ride to Redemption Springs and pay her debt. Anonymously. And somehow that felt worth any price. Ezra arrived in Redemption Springs as the sun was clearing the mountains. He tied his horse outside the bank and waited. At precisely 8 o'clock, Mr. Garrison arrived. "Mr. Cole," he said, surprised. "I have business," Ezra said, his voice even. Inside, Ezra placed the heavy leather pouch on the desk. "I'm here to settle a debt." Garrison's eyebrows rose. "Not mine," Ezra clarified. "Martha Hendriss's debt." The banker's expression shifted. "You're here to pay it?" "That's right. May I ask why? Does it matter?" Garrison leaned back. "It's unusual." "The money's good," Ezra said flatly. Garrison slowly counted the money. $340 exactly, he finally announced. "The debt is satisfied." "Good," Ezra said, turning to leave. "There is the matter of the receipt," Garrison said, his voice slick. "How should I note this payment? Shall I tell Mrs. Hendriss you were her benefactor?" "No," Ezra's voice was firm. "She doesn't need to know." Garrison's lips curved into a smirk. "You want this to be anonymous? Privacy has a price, Mr. Cole." "Extortion." "How much?" Ezra's jaw tightened. "Let's call it $5, for my discretion." Ezra reached into his pocket and pulled out 5 of his remaining dollars. "I'll record the payment as coming from an anonymous benefactor," Garrison said, sweeping the coins into his drawer. "She'll likely never know what you've done." "Don't need any," Ezra said. As he reached the door, Garrison called out, "Mr. Cole, for what it's worth, I think what you've done is either remarkably noble or remarkably foolish." "Possibly both," Ezra said, and stepped out into the sun. He was about to mount his horse when a voice stopped him. "Ezra Cole." It was Tommy Sullivan, the young drifter who boarded at Martha's. "I saw you come out of the bank," Tommy said, breathless. "Did you just—" Ezra cut him off with a look. "Private business." But Tommy's eyes widened with understanding. "It was you. You paid her debt." Ezra stepped closer, his voice a low growl. "Listen to me, son. Whatever you think you saw, you keep it to yourself. Mrs. Hendriss is not to know. Understood?" "Yes, sir." Tommy nodded slowly. "But why?" "Because some things are better done quietly." Ezra mounted his horse and turned toward the mountains, but as he rode past the boarding house, he glanced at the door. The eviction notice was still there. By afternoon, it would be gone. Back in Redemption Springs, the news spread like a wildfire. An anonymous benefactor had paid Martha's debt. By noon, the town was buzzing. When the banker's assistant came to remove the notice, he found Martha inside. "Mrs. Hendriss, Your property taxes have been paid in full. Martha stared at him. What? Someone came in this morning and settled the entire amount. Who? The word was a whisper. The benefactor wished to remain anonymous. She gripped the doorframe. Someone had paid $340 to save her. But who? And why? She sat at her kitchen table staring at the receipt. The question spun in her mind. Old Jacob came in for his tea. Maybe you don't need to understand, Jacob said gently. Maybe you just need to accept it as a blessing. Someone out there sees you the way you deserve to be seen. The tears came then, great shaking sobs of relief and confusion. I'm going to find out who did this, she said. I need to thank them. She went door to door, but most people just laughed. She briefly considered Ezra Cole, but the idea was absurd. A poor mountain man? Where would he get that kind of money? She dismissed the thought, never knowing her benefactor was back in his cabin, rationing supplies. 2 weeks later, Ezra rode down from the mountains, his supplies running dangerously low. He was in the mercantile when Martha walked in. Mr. Cole, she said, her voice warm. As he gathered his meager supplies, Martha spoke again. Mr. Cole, I wonder if I might ask you something. Ezra's heart skipped. I was wondering, she chose her words carefully, if you would consider staying for a meal at the boarding house. No charge, of course. Ezra's first instinct was to say no, but she was looking at him with such genuine kindness. All right, he heard himself say. I'd be obliged. Wonderful, she smiled. Dinner is at 6. He left the store in a daze. The thought was terrifying and strangely appealing. The dinner at Martha's boarding house was a turning point. Over the next few weeks, something gentle grew between them. Martha found herself thinking about the quiet mountain man. She asked old Jacob about him. War does things to a man, Martha, Jacob explained. Ezra is the kind that can't bear to talk about it at all. A soldier. That added a new piece to the puzzle. She began leaving small packages for him at the mercantile. A loaf of fresh bread, a jar of preserves. Ezra didn't know how to reciprocate. He left a bundle of perfectly split firewood on her porch one night. He dropped off fresh venison. He fixed her broken fence gate. Each gesture made Martha more certain. This man cared about her. But did he care enough to pay her debt? Before she could find out, new trouble arrived. Rumors began to circulate about a gang of rustlers led by a man named Jack Calhoun, a man with a reputation for violence. They're not just rustlers, Sheriff Dalton warned. They're killers, and we have almost no way to defend ourselves. Fear spread through the town. This is my home, Martha told her boarders. I'm not abandoning it. That evening, she heard frantic hoofbeats. It was Ezra. Spotted riders coming this way from the north, he said, his voice urgent. Heavily armed. I think it's Calhoun's gang. When? Tomorrow. Maybe the day after. Martha, you need to leave town. Tonight. I'm not leaving, she said. What happens to them if I run? Ezra looked at her, and she saw fear in his eyes. Not for himself, but for her. Then I'm staying too. Ezra, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Why? She asked, her eyes stinging with tears. Because some things matter more than safety, he said, his voice low. Some people matter more than common sense. And I'd rather face whatever's coming, standing beside you, than spend the rest of my life wondering if I could have helped and didn't. They sat up late in the kitchen, drinking coffee. Ezra told her of his family's farm, of the war. I couldn't stay there, he said. Not after what I'd seen. So I came west. Figured I could outrun it. Didn't work. Maybe you're not supposed to outrun it, Martha said, taking his hand. Maybe you're supposed to live with it and find a way to be something more. They sat in comfortable silence as dawn approached. What neither of them knew was that the gang was closer than they thought. Jack Calhoun and his men were already camped just miles outside of town, planning their descent. The gang arrived just as the afternoon sun began to dip. 5 men rode in first, spreading out along the main street. Then came Jack Calhoun. He was a big man with a scar that twisted his face and eyes as cold as winter ice. The town went silent. Doors slammed shut. Sheriff Dalton emerged from his office, his hand trembling. "I'm going to have to ask you to move along." Calhoun just laughed. "We're just passing through. Need lodging." He pointed toward the boarding house. "That place still taking guests?" From her window, Martha watched with a growing dread. Ezra stood beside her, his body tense. "That's Calhoun," he whispered. "Lock the doors." But before she could move, there was a heavy knock. 2 of Calhoun's men were on her porch. "We hear you run a boarding house," one of them said. "We'd like some rooms." "I'm afraid I'm fully booked," Martha said, keeping the door open only a crack. "That's so?" the man sneered. "Looks empty to me." The other man leaned against the rail. "Be a shame if something happened to this place. Old building like this probably catches fire real easy." Just then, Ezra appeared in the doorway behind Martha. "The lady said she's full up," he said calmly. The 2 men looked at Ezra. "Who are you, old man?" "Just a friend, and I'm suggesting you move along." The man laughed. "You suggesting? There's 5 of us and 1 of you." "I can count," Ezra said. Calhoun's voice broke the standoff. "What's the holdup, boys?" He walked up to the porch steps, studying Ezra. "This old woman says she's got no rooms," one of his men explained. Calhoun's cold eyes fixed on Ezra. "That right, friend?" "I think," Ezra said carefully, "that the lady has the right to refuse service." Calhoun smiled, a terrible expression. "Out here, rights are what men with guns say they are." He turned his gaze to Martha. "So here's what's going to happen, Mrs. Hendress. You're going to be charitable to me and my boys. And in exchange, we won't burn your little town to the ground." "Get off my property," Martha said, surprised by her own strength. Calhoun's expression darkened. He took a step onto the porch, and Ezra moved to block him. "That's close enough," Ezra said quietly. Calhoun stopped. "You know what? There's something about the way you move. Military." Ezra didn't respond. "Well, let me tell you something, soldier boy," Calhoun snarled. "You keep standing in my way, you're going to find out just how quick I can end this." "Maybe," Ezra said, his voice dangerously low. "But not before I end you, and I think you're smart enough to know that's true." For a split second, something flickered in Calhoun's eyes. Recognition. He was facing someone just as dangerous as he was. "Well, well," Calhoun said, forcing a smile. "We'll give you a pass, for now. But Mrs. Hendress," he looked past Ezra, "you and I aren't finished." He turned and walked away. Martha sagged against the doorframe. "Inside," Ezra said gently. That night, the town held its breath. The saloon burned with light and the sound of rough laughter. At the boarding house, Ezra organized a watch. Martha brought him coffee as he sat by the window, his rifle across his knees. "Ezra," she said, "you could have been killed." "Could have," he replied. "Didn't happen." "But what if it had?" He looked at her then. "I spent 15 years up in those mountains, Martha. Hiding. And today, I realized something." "What?" "That I'd rather die protecting something that matters than live another day protecting nothing at all." "I matter to you?" "You matter to me," he confirmed quietly. She reached over and took his hand. "You matter to me too, Ezra." "Ezra," she said softly, "when my debt was paid, was that you?" He went very still. "Why do you think it was me?" "Because Tommy saw you at the bank. Because you're the only person who's ever looked at me like I'm worth something. Because it's exactly the kind of thing you would do. He was silent for a long moment. I couldn't let you lose your home, he finally said. And I couldn't tell you because I did it because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. That's not selfish, Ezra. That's the most selfless thing anyone's ever done for me. She lifted his hand to her cheek. Thank you. You've always mattered, Ezra said. The world was just too blind to see it. By the time dawn broke, they were no longer two lonely people. They were partners. The next day, Calhoun and his men emerged from the saloon, hungover and mean. They terrorized the town, taking supplies, emptying the bank, beating anyone who looked at them wrong. Then, that afternoon, Calhoun appeared on Martha's porch again. He was alone. I've decided your boarding house would make a much better headquarters, he said through the chain door. You're going to invite us in. And if you don't? He leaned closer, his voice a venomous whisper. I'm going to start hurting people you care about. Old Jacob first, then the Chinese fellow, then that boy, Tommy. I'll make sure you watch. You've got until sundown. He walked away, whistling. Martha leaned against the door, shaking. Ezra appeared, his expression grim. He means it. I know, Ezra said, which means we have to act first. Act how? There's 7 of them. I've fought longer odds before, Ezra said, and Martha saw the soldier he used to be in his eyes. And I'll be damned if I'm going to let that man hurt you. He began to explain his plan. As the sun began to set, she made her own decision. She carefully set aside the wedding ring she wore around her neck. That chapter was closed. This was a new one. Tell me what you need me to do, she said, her voice steady. We need to know more about you, Martha said gently. Ezra nodded. He sat at the kitchen table, and the others, Tommy, Jacob, Lynn, gathered around. From his saddlebag, he pulled a faded photograph. It showed a much younger, clean-shaven man in a Union cavalry officer's uniform. That's you? Tommy breathed. Captain Ezra Cole, 3rd Pennsylvania Cavalry, Ezra said, his voice flat. I enlisted in '61, fought at Gettysburg, Petersburg. After the war, I stayed on. He recounted his last mission, tracking a band that had taken hostages. We got the hostages back, he said. But we killed 16 men. Warriors, old men, even a couple of boys no older than Tommy here. I was the one giving the orders. He told them about the last man he killed, a young warrior, trying to protect an old woman. He looked right at me. Ezra's voice dropped to a whisper, like he was asking me why. What did you do? Lynn asked quietly. I took the shot. 3 days later, I resigned my commission. I couldn't pull that trigger one more time. Why are you telling us this now? Martha asked. Because if we're going to do this, you need to understand what you're asking of me. The man in that photograph, he's still in here. If I do what I'm planning, I'll be letting him out again, and I don't know if I can put him back. What exactly are you planning? Calhoun expects us to flee, Ezra said, pulling out a rough map. What he doesn't expect is an assault. We hit them hard, fast, and cut their numbers before they can organize. You're talking about killing them, Lynn said, his voice shaking. I'm talking about defending this town. Ezra's eyes were hard. But yes, some of them will die. Martha looked at him. I'm not hiding while you put yourself in danger, she said. This is my home. I'm fighting beside you. Ezra looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. You ever fire a gun? My husband taught me. All right, he said, pulling a pistol from his belt. You'll cover me from the boarding house windows. They spent the last hour of daylight preparing. As the sun dropped lower, Ezra stood by the window, watching the saloon. Martha came to stand beside him. Promise me something, she said. That you won't lose yourself in this. I promise, Ezra said, squeezing her hand. Then the sun touched the horizon. Across town, Jack Calhoun poured another whiskey, smiling. He was sure the old woman and her protector were packing their bags. He had no idea that a captain of the cavalry was about to bring the war to him. Just after sundown, Tommy found Sheriff Dalton's badge pinned to the front door with a crumpled note. Can't do this anymore, God forgive me. He ran, Tommy said, his hands shaking. Good, Ezra said quietly. How is that good? Because now we don't have to worry about him getting in the way. He looked at Martha. Through the window, they could see the saloon blazing with light. They think they've won, Lynn said bitterly. That confidence will make them careless, Ezra replied. And carelessness kills. He moved to the table where his weapons lay. The gentle mountain man was gone, replaced by the cold, efficient cavalry captain. Here's how this works, Ezra said, pointing to his map. 7 men total, 4 in the saloon, 2 on patrol, 1 lookout at the bank. First, we take out the lookout, quietly. Then, we force a confrontation at the saloon, on our terms. He looked at each of them. If anyone wants out, say so now. No one spoke. We move in 15 minutes. Those 15 minutes stretched for an eternity. Martha brought him a cup of coffee. Ezra, she said quietly. After this, if we both make it through, there's something I need to tell you. Tell me now, he said, in case there isn't an after. I've spent 12 years being invisible, she began. But you saw me, and that changed everything. I care about you, Ezra Cole. He put down his coffee cup and gently touched her cheek. I came down from that mountain planning to pay your debt and disappear, he said. But then you invited me to dinner. You looked at me like I was still human. I don't want to be alone anymore, Martha. So what are you saying? I'm saying that when this is over, I want to build something with you. If you'll have me. Yes, she said simply. Yes. Just then, Ezra's pocket watch chimed. Time to move. They slipped out the back door. Ezra moved like a ghost. Martha followed, her pistol clutched in her hands. The lookout at the bank was young, bored, smoking a cigarette. Stay here, Ezra whispered. Before she could respond, he melted into the shadows. Martha crouched behind a water barrel, her heart hammering. The lookout yawned. Then Ezra was there. A brief, silent struggle, a muffled gasp, and the young man slumped into Ezra's arms. A moment later, Ezra reappeared beside her. Is he unconscious? He'll live. I'm proud of you, Ezra, she whispered. Don't be, he said, his voice tight. Not yet. They ran, sticking to the shadows, until they were across the street from the saloon. Through the swinging doors, they could see 4 men drinking, their rifles leaning against the bar. Unprepared. Sloppy. This is it, Ezra whispered. Wait for my signal. He took a deep breath, and the last of the mountain hermit vanished. In his place was Captain Cole, a man about to do what he did best. Ezra took the first shot. From the shadows, his rifle cracked once, and the window of the saloon exploded. A man inside cried out and fell. Chaos erupted. Before the remaining 3 men could grab their weapons, Ezra kicked open the doors and fired twice more with his pistol. 2 more men went down. The last one, the lean man who had threatened Martha, dove behind the bar, firing wildly. Martha now! Ezra yelled. From her position, Martha raised her pistol and fired at the bar. The shots were inaccurate, but they forced the lean man to keep his head down. You're dead, old man, the man screamed. Not yet, Ezra said, and kicked over a table for cover. Just then, the 2 men from the patrol came running. Ezra, behind you! Martha screamed. She fired her pistol at the approaching men, forcing them to take cover. Ezra was caught in a crossfire. It was a classic trap, and he had walked right into it. Then something unexpected happened. The doors to the houses and shops along the main street began to open. Men, and some women, emerged with whatever weapons they had. Led by Samuel the blacksmith, they began firing on the two gang members. The town had found its courage. The two men were quickly overwhelmed. One surrendered, the other was shot. Now it was just Ezra and the man in the saloon, and Jack Calhoun, who had been upstairs. Calhoun appeared at the top of the staircase, a shotgun in each hand. "You made a mistake coming here, soldier boy," he roared and fired both barrels. The buckshot tore through the room. Ezra dove to the floor. The lean man saw his chance. He rose from behind the bar, pistol leveled at Ezra. But he hadn't counted on Martha. She had moved closer, her fear replaced by a cold, protective rage. She fired one last time. The bullet caught the lean man in the shoulder. He screamed and dropped his gun. Now it was just Calhoun. He stood at the top of the stairs, reloading. Ezra knew he had only seconds. He rolled, came up to one knee, and fired his rifle. The shot was perfect. It hit Calhoun in the leg, and the big man roared in pain, tumbling down the stairs. The fight was over. The townspeople surged into the street, cheering. But Martha had celebrated too soon. A shout came from down the street. "Fire! The boarding house is on fire!" Martha's heart stopped. She spun to see orange flames licking at the back of her home. In the chaos, one of Calhoun's men, wounded, had crawled away and set the blaze. "Tommy! Lynn! Jacob!" Martha screamed and ran toward the building. "Wait!" Ezra yelled, but she tore free. The front door was barred. Ezra arrived beside her. "Move!" He kicked the door once, twice. On the third strike, it burst inward. A wall of black smoke poured out. "Stay here," Ezra ordered. "Like hell I will." She coughed, and they plunged into the smoke together. The heat was intense. "Tommy!" she cried. A muffled response came from upstairs. They stumbled toward the staircase, flames spreading across the ceiling. They found Tommy first, collapsed in the hallway. Ezra hoisted him over his shoulder. "Get him out!" Martha yelled. "I'll find the others." Ezra hesitated, then carried Tommy toward the stairs. Martha pushed deeper into the suffocating fog. She found Lynn in his room, trying to open a window. She grabbed his arm and pulled him into the hall, but the smoke was disorienting. Suddenly, Ezra was there again. "This way!" He guided them. They reached the stairs just as the ceiling collapsed behind them. A wave of heat seared Martha's back, but they kept moving, stumbling out into the cool night air. Tommy was conscious, coughing but alive. "Jacob?" Martha gasped. "Where's Jacob?" Tommy's eyes widened in horror. "He was in the parlor, keeping watch." Martha turned to run back in, but Ezra caught her. "No, I'll go. You can barely stand." "And you've got a burned back and smoke in your lungs," he said, his face grim. "I'm going. That's final." He turned and ran back into the burning house. The crowd held its breath. The building groaned. Part of the front porch collapsed. "Ezra!" Martha screamed. "Get out!" And then, two figures emerged from the smoke. Ezra, blackened by soot, supporting Jacob. They were barely 10 feet from the building when it gave way. With a deafening roar, the boarding house collapsed in on itself. The blast of heat knocked everyone back. Through the chaos, Martha could see Ezra and Jacob on the ground. People rushed to pull them clear. Martha fought through the crowd to reach him. Ezra was sitting up, coughing hard. "You idiot!" Martha sobbed, kneeling beside him, tears cutting clean tracks through the soot on her cheeks. "You absolute idiot! You could have died!" "Had to," Ezra coughed. "Couldn't leave him." "You couldn't leave him, so you nearly left me," she cried. "Don't you dare do that to me again." He reached up and touched her face. "I'm sorry, but I made a promise to protect people who matter." "That includes you," she said fiercely. Behind them, her home was burning to the ground, but she felt a strange, profound relief. The house had been her link to the past. Sometimes you have to let the past burn away to make room for the future. It's just a building, she said quietly. Ezra looked at her, surprised. What matters, she said more firmly, is the people. Everything else we can rebuild. The townspeople, their faces filled with remorse, were already organizing. We'll help, Mrs. Keene said, her voice genuine for the first time. We should have helped years ago. As dawn broke, the territorial marshal finally arrived. He surveyed the scene with surprised approval. Looks like you folks handled things, he said. He recognized Ezra's name. Captain Cole. Heard about you. Good to see those skills put to use. He and his deputies took the prisoners away. As they loaded Calhoun into a wagon, the gang leader looked at Ezra. Could have killed me. Why didn't you? Because I've killed enough men in my life, Ezra said. I'm done with being hard. In the ruins of her home, Martha found her Bible and a few photographs, and still on its chain, Thomas's wedding ring. She held it one last time, then walked over to Jacob. I want you to have this, she said. Thomas would have liked you. Martha, I can't. Please, she insisted. I need to let it go. Ezra appeared beside her. What will you do now? Start over, I suppose. Or, he said carefully, taking her hand, you could consider something different. Come up the mountain with me. I have land. We could build something together. A real house. A way station for travelers. Martha looked at the town that had finally come to see her worth, but starting fresh with Ezra, that was the future. I want it, she said simply. I want to build something with you. His face transformed with a smile. The town council granted Martha the deed to her land, free and clear, and gave them both $500 for protecting the town. 3 months later, Martha stood on the porch of the house she and Ezra had built. It was solid and warm, with a view of the valley below. Ezra came to stand beside her, his arm around her waist. What are you thinking about? He asked. How 3 months ago I thought my life was over, she said. Now, I feel like it's just beginning. He pulled something from his pocket, a simple gold band. He had melted down his old military medals to make something new, transforming a symbol of his violent past into a symbol of their future. I know we're too old for grand gestures, he began, but I also know we can't afford to waste time. Martha Hendris, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Tears of joy streamed down her face. Yes, she said. Absolutely, yes. He slipped the ring on her finger. It fit perfectly. He pulled her close and kissed her, a kiss full of promise. They were married the next week in the church in Redemption Springs, the whole town there to celebrate. They had been invisible to the world, but they had seen each other, and in the end, that was all that mattered. If this story touched you, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because what we have coming next is something you won't want to miss.